It's hard to go from being the youngest mayor elected in my community to being the longest serving. And when people ask me what's the, I often get it from other mayors, what's the success of, actually it's coming up 27 years in next week. The real key to being a successful mayor is this, that you keep the half of council that doesn't like you away from the half of council that hasn't made up their mind yet. And one of the things you do learn, there's a bit of an aura that comes with serving so long. It's one of my favorite quotes is from the movie Chinatown. And in that, one of the characters say that old buildings, prostitutes, and politicians become respectable if they last long enough. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. You know, often when you hear crime stories, you'll hear there were innocent bystanders. That is true. But my belief is there's no innocent bystanders in life. And I always ask people, and I'm sure people like Mike do when you go to a lot of functions, why are you involved in this issue? I don't have a personal connection with the issue. It simply became a matter of civil rights and looking at my community and its future. David Onley, who's been referred to a number of times today already, and I'm sure will be again later today, brought a group of us together because of our individual actions. People like Mark Wafer, who will be speaking later today, Joe Dale, Bob Van Sickle from Community Living, and myself back in 2010. And we formed this incredible group of champions that have different interests. I'm the only public figure involved. The rest are private sector. We take a different approach, and some of the comments I make today may disturb some in the room, but we just believe in the business case for hiring. We also don't support subsidies, which appear to be the trend both provincially and federally as it relates to employment. We believe there should be real pay, and we also believe that subsidies are very short term. They usually last for the employment period of the subsidy, and then they disappear, the jobs disappear. I started the Mayor's Challenge in 2010 because of Bob Van Sickle at Community Living. We'd worked together on a number of issues, and he said we need to do something beyond this. And one of the things that I've learned as mayor is that I do have that bully pulpit. You know, mayors don't hire people, but what we do is create a culture. And we're leaders in hope. We're leaders in giving people an opportunity. And in my own community, if I can give you a couple of examples of what I consider a collaborative community. We started a program there called Rebound, which deals with troubled youth. That's now being franchised to nonprofits around the province. We started another program called Circles, which embraces people in poverty. It's almost like an Alcoholics Anonymous. You're there every day for them. Highly successful, moving people from being tax receivers to taxpayers. So when this challenge was started, the theme of it was to do the right thing. And it probably explained where I was at that particular point in time. And what's happened in the 5 years that I've been heavily involved in this issue is I've gone from being a bystander to being an activist and to being angry. Because the reality is we're making incremental steps, and I applaud what's happening here, and that's why I was part of this 2 years ago. But I sense there should be much more urgency to some of the issues we're dealing with. And what happens, and you'll see on the tables there a brochure that's being released today about what's been going on in Sarnia. We hired more challenged students in the last number of years than any other city in Canada. We're talking about a city of 75,000 people. And ironically, I tried in this city with the former mayor and got nowhere. You've tried across this province. And what happened with David Onley was he goes as Lieutenant Governor to communities, he meets the mayor and council. And then he would get back to me saying, you do the follow-up. This is the intelligence on this particular mayor and their council. And I would do that. And we did bring a lot of communities in. But what I found with municipalities across the province, they don't recognize that disability unemployment is perpetual. It's just there, and it just doesn't disappear. And that cities have the ability to lead. With all respect to our federal and provincial counterparts, the reason why we've started grassroots campaigns is because we can do it and make it work. But what I've found with cities, and I challenge you to go back to your own community and ask them what they're doing. The mayor will probably tell you, well, we issue a proclamation. We raise a flag. He'll probably tell you, he or she, they're a very inclusive community. They're following the standards. What they're really saying to you is, we're doing the minimum, we're not doing the maximum. You know, if I give you an example of my own community, building a new sports center, we know what the legislation says, but what's the need? What's the need? I ironically chuckle anytime I go by a shopping center. When you look at parking for those who are called handicapped, I guess we have this theory in Canada, you can release 5 handicapped people at a time to go to shopping malls. Just think about that. That's the minimum, not the maximum. And while I'm talking on language, and I don't have all the answers on this one, but I'm a student of language. And some of the phrases and sentences we use, including myself, need to change. Just as we went from crippled children 50 years ago, and the R word, which I won't use. But think of it. In Sarnia, I mentioned the number of intellectually challenged people that we employed. Who in this room is not intellectually challenged, including myself? The word accommodation, which is a bad word in the business community. When they hear the word accommodate, we have to accommodate someone. Well, the reality is you accommodate everyone in the workplace to some degree. And it's a word that needs to disappear. The other one that gets me throwing things at the TV screen is every time I hear the media say, whatever political thing happened, it fell on deaf ears. And the insinuation is that those deaf ears, and you'll see my friend Mark Wafer today prove to you that deaf ears are very intelligent and it can accomplish a lot. Another example of what came out of the Mayor's Challenge was the business community was doing what you would expect. They said they were supportive. But the reality is when it came to disability employment in Sarnia, they were at the back of the parade. I suspect that's the same in most communities, right? Supportive, not particularly activist. But through a lot of work and engagement, we moved to the back of the parade and they moved to the front. And one of the reasons we keep the nonprofit groups, no disrespect to you, out of the public face of our champions group is because business needs to talk to business. They need to make that business case. And I have to say, with full credit to the Sarnia-Lambton Chamber of Commerce, not only did they embrace it, they went to their Ontario chamber and said, we've got to look at doing this across the province. And out of that came a new program called Breaking Barriers to Business, which basically says we can make your business accessible for a lot less than what you're probably being told it's going to cost. And when you say to a business person, hey, would you like to have 20, 30% more people, 40% come through your door? They look at you and say, well, how does that happen? Well, maybe you don't need all those high stools. Maybe you need some simple things to get people in that business. And I'm pleased to say the Breaking Barriers to Business, which was David Onley's idea, and it came from a little town in Ireland called Castle. There was a heritage town. And they decided they were going to make that town accessible, but they were going to do it in a low-cost manner, and they achieved that, and that's what we've moved forward on. And the 13 tourism groups in southwestern Ontario in this past year have adopted the program and made it one of their priorities, because there's a huge market out there for disability tourism. And as you know, that market will continue to grow. And I'll just make another little pitch for my own community in the sense that I use the word collaborative ad nauseum, just like the Premier talks about conversations. And I try to get it out of my dialogue, but it's a reality. 20, 25 years ago, my community was very much in turmoil. Business and labor were in conflict, and I was asked if I could bring them together. And I recall saying to him, well, why don't you let me go to the Middle East, or maybe to Belfast on the way home, and when I solve those two issues, then I'll come back and solve this. But the reality was they did come together. So I can point to the only community that I know of in Canada that has business, labor, First Nations, local elected people on economic and social development. And what I've learned out of that experiment was, if you're not talking to each other, you end up shouting. And that's exactly what happens too often on too many issues. And on all the issues of access, I think too many people act like it's swallowing castor oil. I remember there was a survey of mayors done, and all of them were negative on the disability legislation, on the burden. Well, it's not a burden, it's an opportunity. One quick comment I want to make, our group has been the champions on the issue of sheltered workshops. A very controversial issue. In fact, my friend Mark Wafer is meeting at this very moment with the minister who's promised to transition out of that. And it's very difficult for me because Community and Living in Sarnia, which has been very supportive of all the initiatives I've been involved in, is also has a sheltered workshop. And it's a very emotional and difficult debate. But no one should be being paid 46 cents an hour, and no one should be segregated. And when I talk about segregation, I sometimes feel like I'm talking about Mississippi in the 1960s. We still put people together without integration into our communities. So the message back in my own community is, yes, there's some major issues to overcome, some major obstacles, but do you want the law to tell you to change, or do you want to embrace it and make it happen? And make it happen in a way that, and it has happened. I've got an organization in my community that 4 years ago made that decision and has moved to a better place with people being paid exactly what they deserve for the work they do. So I'm pleased to tell you this morning, after 5 years, that we're going to relaunch the Mayor's Challenge. And as I speak, it's going out across the Ontario Disability Employment Network. Next week it'll go to 440 mayors across this province. And I said before, I sort of taken the tiny Tim Jerry Lewis approach before when I said it was about doing the right thing. The new approach is going to be do the smart thing. Just do the smart thing for your community and for the people in your community. David Onley, Emil was talking about definitions of accessibility. I just want to give you David Onley's definition. And accessibility is what enables disabled people to achieve their full potential. Accessibility includes equality of opportunity employment, and equality of opportunity is justice. And what I would add to that is, but it's not charity. The time to move forward is now, and I think of the words of Martin Luther King, and he often talked about the fierce urgency of now. And I personally am not willing to wait 5, 10 years to see some of the things that should be happening now. We've watched the legislation in Ontario, 10-year anniversary being celebrated. The reality is, it's not met its goals. And it's a one-day wonder in the news cycle. I just read the minister's mandate letters from the new Prime Minister. All those letters, not one word about disability employment. It's about time that 20, 30, 40% of the population was given their fair due and opportunity within our communities and across this country. And I appreciate the research you're doing, but I really believe in that fierce urgency of now, and we need to move quicker and faster in asking for the very basic rights that so many other Canadians have. We don't see that as it relates to disability employment. We often just give it lip service. So I want to close, when I talk about collaboration in my own community, leave you with the words of Helen Keller, and I believe that's what this is about today. And Helen Keller said that alone we can do so little, and together we can do so much. So with you here today, I believe we can do a lot, but we need to have that fierce urgency of now. Thank you.